Welcome to Straight White American Jesus. My name is Brad Onishi. Our show is hosted in partnership with the CAP Center, UCSB, and I'm here today with my co-host.
I'm Dan Miller, Associate Professor of Religion and Social Thought at Landmark College. Brad, it's good to see you.
Dan's got to think about where he works. He's in full summer mode. He's really just buying into this whole
in a t-shirt in my home office, right?
So that's right. Yeah. That's right. I'm doing all right. I'm under the weather this week, so definitely fighting through a weird summer cold. But
we can confirm though that it is a summer cold and not some breakthrough infection or something like that.
Yeah. So yeah, we're pretty sure of that. So no need to worry, folks. But anyway, all right, Dan. Want to jump into some things this week, and we decided, it's sometimes tempting in the show to do too much, right? There's so many stories. There's so many things we could talk about. We have 45 minutes, 50 minutes. We could go on for 3 hours every week. And I know you do this in class. Sometimes I do it too. Sometimes, you have some big ideas and you have a lot of important sort of things to get through in a class. And you say, hey, let's do a close reading. And what that means is let's zero in on a particularly important passage and let that guide us through this sort of big set of ideas and principles and histories or whatever else we're doing. So I think we want to do that today. We want to do what we think of as a kind of close reading of some statements made by 3 different American political and military figures this week and see what those can tell us about our current political state. We continue to live in a country where the big lie is being propagated and spread. We continue to live in a country where critical race theory has become enemy number 1 of the conservative right. And it's all planned, Dan, and we could do an hour on how the rage against critical race theory is just one more sort of midterm strategy, midterm bogeyman that the GOP and others have cooked up in order to instill fear in people to get them to vote in a certain way. So let's talk about this. Let's talk first about Senator Josh Hawley. Okay. So let me read you the statements from Josh Hawley this week, Dan. He says this: I'm afraid that President Biden is nominating individuals who do not share a view of America as a good and decent place, who do not believe the history of this nation is worth celebrating, and that it's a nation founded in racism and shot through with corruption. Young children sent off to school with eyes full of hope and hearts full of pride in their country, only to be taught that white privilege defines the nation, that the Christian faith is oppressive, that the nuclear family perpetuates racism. I've heard many say the United States is indeed built on oppression and remains a systematically racist place. All I can say, Mr. President, is that that is not the America I see, and it's not the America that I know. All right. So, Dan, in a close reading, we got to go sort of sentence by sentence. Okay. So I'm afraid, this is Hawley talking about the Biden administration, that President Biden is nominating individuals who do not share a view of America as a good and decent place, who do not believe the history of this nation is worth celebrating, and that it's a nation founded in racism and shot through with corruption. When we look at that sentence, what comes to mind for you?
The biggest thing that comes to mind, this is a theme I'm going to come back to a few times today, is this notion of sort of thought policing, right, in a certain way. We'll talk more about this later. We got some stuff from our friend Ron DeSantis down in Florida to talk about. But, if people are aware with what goes on in places like China or authoritarian regimes, or back in my time, long ago in the former Soviet Union, right, when you had officers of the state whose job was literally to make sure that people were saying the right things, that they were professing the right beliefs and so forth. That's what this is. And so it's this notion of predetermining what the nation can have been in its history, right? And the verbs are all weird there, right? Predetermining what the nation can have been, like the way that you can even approach history, or we've talked before about ways of remembering or things that we're no longer permitted to remember. It's more of that, right? That we have to remember our history. We have to tell our story in a certain way for it to be acceptable. And if the story is not acceptable ahead of time, we're not going to allow anybody to tell it, to explore it, to look at it. So I mean, it really is an effort, an explicit effort at this point at thought police kind of actions.
So he says, nominating individuals who do not share a view of America as a good and decent place, and who do not believe the history of the nation is worth celebrating. So to me, this brings up a couple of things, right? A fancy philosophical term for this, Dan, would be a straw man. He's setting up a caricature of the Biden nominees as so far on one side of things that they're indefensible. Hey, you're nominating someone for a cabinet position or for something else who thinks America is the worst place ever, and who thinks that the history of this nation is void of anything at all worth celebrating. So on one hand, it's a straw man. And another hand, Dan, it's a false dilemma. It's a false binary, right? And conservatives do this all the time, and so do fundamentalists. We've talked about this at length on our show. There is a way of thinking that says everything is either or. So so this comes down to either America is a good and decent place, or you think it's not a good and decent place. There's no way to be in between. That the history of this nation is worth celebrating, or it's not worth celebrating. Everybody take a side, right? So we have a caricature and we have a false binary here that is infuriating. Right? There's so much more to history. There's so much more to a country's story than simply either or. And then he finishes off with that it's a nation founded in racism and shot through with corruption. Again, the hint seems to be that if you think that this is a nation founded in racism, that you can't think that this is a good place or a place worth celebrating, that it's either or. And I just want to make sure everyone sees the structure of the thought here, right? That in order to advance his point, he has to rely on a straw man and he has to rely on a false binary. And I think that's really important. I think it's something we're going to see throughout our discussion for today. All right.
Another point, I just want to jump in here for a sec that I think about, and this comes up, you mentioned fundamentalism, right? It comes up with this. I think it defines political conservatism, and I think just in any sort of almost dictionary definition of it, it would define it. It certainly defines the notion of MAGA, make America great what? Again, these are always backward looking philosophies, right? The greatness of a nation or a tradition or an institution is always in the past. There's always this kind of golden age projected backwards. And so it's the point that you make that lots and lots of critics of contemporary American society, or people who want to take an honest, hard look at the past, can ask the question, why do we want to do that? It's not because we hate America. It's because we think America could be perfected. It could be better than it is, right? So that's another piece for people to realize that you have fundamentally like backwards looking approaches versus fundamentally forward looking approaches that say there's promise in this country, unfulfilled. It's never been fully carried out. And yes, in some ways, to attain that promise, it might mean to go beyond the intentions of the founders or whatever other kind of mythical things we hold to. But that's another piece of this, right? Is that for the conservatives, for fundamentalists, this isn't limited to the US, this isn't limited to Christian fundamentalists. The best is always behind us. And so there's always a sort of backward look as opposed to an open future that we could be moving toward. And I think that's really important to understand this too, is you have to, again, kind of sound philosophical about it, right? Really fundamentally different kinds of perspectives on what history is and what it is to be in history and to live in a society.
I agree. And I think that nostalgia is, we've talked about this. If you talk to Perry and Whitehead and others who study Christian nationalism, Ruth Bronstein, nostalgia is a big part of the United States that often never existed, a mythical past. Okay. The next sentence that Josh Hawley, senator from Missouri, talks about in the sort of context of Biden nominees, but talking about education, talking about our universities, all that stuff. Young children sent off to school with eyes full of hope and hearts full of pride in their country, only to be taught that white privilege defines the nation, that the Christian faith is oppressive, that the nuclear family perpetuates racism. Again, Dan, I'll just jump in first. We have the either or, okay? We have this either or situation. We also have another caricature. So somehow we're now envisioning kindergartners and third graders going off to school. And my brother's a third grade teacher. I cannot imagine my brother standing up in front of his class trying to teach them like math and reading skills and just trying to slip in there. Hey, did you all know faith is oppressive? And if you're part of a nuclear family, that's racist. It's a straw man. It's a caricature. That's one. Number two is, right, hearts full of pride in their country, only to be taught that white privilege defines the nation. Look at what he's doing. He's saying, hey, you have children who are full of hope, and now you're teaching them that white privilege defines the nation, and that's inherently bad for them. That is dashing their hopes. it's dashing their pride in their country, and it is severely hurting the children. That's what he's suggesting here, right? There's no consideration that having pride in your country might come from, as Dan, you just said, the attempts to fulfill our promise as a place marked by equality and liberty, so that we are going to understand how white privilege has pervaded the nation and try to move forward in a way that is better, is different, is more expansive, and so on, right? There's this sort of just assumption that, hey, I sent these little children off, and they're just, and you can imagine that they're white children, right? There's no other children in this image. They're little white children. They've got their backpacks. They're happy, not a care in the world, and they start learning the hard truths of history, and we just ruin their lives. And is that really what we want? Again, there's no consideration that in order to sort of fulfill the potential of those children, we have to fulfill the potential of the nation and move forward and try to be better. Anyway, what do you see in this sentence?
You hit the word, you said it, you imagine white children, right? It's the whiteness of this that sort of oozes out. I'm going to go ahead and just bring in like the next statement that Hawley made that we were going to look at, because I think he gets to this as well. He goes on and says, I've heard many say the United States is indeed built on oppression and remains a systemically racist place. All I can say, Mr. President, is that this is not the America I see, and it's not the America that I know. Yeah, I'm sure it's not, right? These appeals to white privilege that they have, that is white privilege, is if you exist only in white spaces, if you've only ever heard a majority kind of white historical account of America, if you've only ever heard accounts of America's religious history and social history and political history that are aimed at sort of privileging the role of white people in that, yeah, that's not the America you've seen. And that's the point, right? The point isn't about hating America. The point is about saying, well, you know what? There have been lots of Americas, always. Since its founding, there have been lots and lots of Americas. And maybe all of us, including the white people who have benefited from a certain vision of America, we need to see those other Americas, hear those other Americas, the value of learning the opinions and the experiences of those who have not been able to participate in the America that maybe I experienced as a white kid growing up, or maybe that Hawley experienced. And it's that's what I'd highlight, is the equal parts naive, but also strategically defensive use of, that's not the America I know. Right. That's the problem. That's what different groups and different organizations are trying to get people to see, is the America that straight white Christian men don't know, and to let them know it, and to see what the country is and has been, and as we say, what it could be if we would let it.
So let's have another fancy philosophical word for today, and that's epistemology. Epistemology is the study of how we know things. And if you read in the kinds of circles Dan and I read in, you'll hear things about epistemologies, and you might even hear about epistemic conditions or epistemologies of the marginalized or the oppressed, or of people of color or Black people, Black Americans, indigenous folks, etc. Right? This is why those conversations are important. Epistemology. What Hawley is saying here is the way that I know, the way that I engage the world, does not allow any sort of information about how America is a racist place, a place that is marked by white privilege, to come into my field of knowledge. My field, he says, that's not the America I see. It doesn't come into his field of vision, right? What Hawley is saying is, hey, if I don't know it and I don't see it, it must not be there. My epistemology, my way of knowing, is the standard. And so if you're saying something about systematic racism or white privilege, if you're saying something about a history or a present that includes those things, well, I don't know them and I don't see them, so they must just not be real. This is, in essence, right, the stakes of this battle are a battle over who gets to determine what is real and what is knowledge. It's a matter of epistemology. It's a matter of metaphysics. How do you know? And so Hawley's basically just saying, if I don't know it and I don't see it, it must not be real. The irony, Dan, is I think you've already gestured toward, is that's white privilege in a nutshell. I mean, Hawley, the white Missouri senator, is saying, if I don't know it and I don't see it, it's not real. All the while in the previous sentence, he's decrying the fact that we might be talking about white privilege. It's incredible.